Welcome back to the Word on Fire Show. I'm Matthew Petrusek, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute and the host of the Word on Fire Show. Thank you for joining us. We continue celebrating our 25th anniversary here at Word on Fire, which means 25 years of proclaiming the gospel, 25 years of evangelizing the culture, 25 years of supporting the faithful, 25 years of inviting the disaffiliated, the forsaken, and those who have fallen away back to Christ and His church. And yes, 25 years of getting denounced, scolded, called out, and condemned for all of it. Throughout the years, the attacks against Bishop Barron and Word on Fire have come from many sources, including from the small but bracingly loud and happily dwindling band of overly online anti-evangelists who hate religion in general and Christianity in particular. Surprisingly, however, the complaints and vilification have also come from those who claim to represent the church, indeed, from those who posture themselves as the church's greatest defenders. What is the substance of these detractions? What motivates them? Do they pose an actual threat to the ministry? And perhaps most importantly, what can they teach us as evangelists about how to respond constructively to public criticism, especially when it's vicious? Here to help us set the record straight and to offer advice on how to develop thick skin without getting a hardened heart is Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop, welcome back to the studio.
Hey, Matt. Always good to be with you.
So today's topic, we're looking at some criticism that we receive here at Word on Fire, some of it directly targeting you.
Yeah.
But before we reach into our mailbag of discontent, what have you been up to recently?
A lot of different things in the diocese. One is we brought the seminarians from IHM, which is the wonderful college seminary in my diocese, and we gathered outside the Planned Parenthood, and we prayed the rosary and prayed some litanies, for the babies who are being killed there, but also for the women, who are going there. We're praying to support them, and but it's always a good experience. It's good for the students, I think, and then we gather for a pizza afterwards, and it's a good evening.
We drive by that clinic every time we drop off our daughter at St. Pius School, and there's always somebody out there praying.
Yeah.
At least one, sometimes many more.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Okay, so let's turn to our topic today. But before we look at some specific criticisms, Bishop, you've been out in the public sphere and online doing this for over 25 years now.
Yeah.
Let's start off by asking this. Is there anything under the sun that surprises you in terms of the kind of vitriol and criticism that you and Word on Fire can get?
Well, no, not really. I mean, there's something about the internet space that has encouraged this sort of critique because it's so easy to criticize. All you got to do is go to your keyboard and you can dash something off. You can do it anonymously, and that's increased the intensity and the vitriol. And I mean, everyone's noticed that. Anyone that's a public person in any way will experience that. Years ago, you'd have to sit down and write a letter, and you have to fold it up and address the envelope and put a stamp on it and send it.
Yeah.
And the person might get it and go, "Oh, it's crazy," and that's the end of it. Well, now anyone and his brother or sister can just sit down on a keyboard and write some stupid thing, and then it's up 24/7, 365 all over the world. And that's encouraged then a lot of the vitriol because everyone can see it. And well, that's ridiculous. So I'm going to answer. I love the internet, love the social media space, but that's its real shadow side.
What was your experience like going back to when you first started posting videos on YouTube and you realized there were comments?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was surprising. I didn't know you could do that. I mean, YouTube was brand new when we started, and I wasn't on it. I wasn't using it until I did my own videos, and I would check them. And what? Oh, people can say things about the video? And I discovered pretty quickly, people very rarely go, "What a lovely video.
Yeah, right.
Congratulations for that beautiful insight." If they comment 94% of the time, it's going to be something negative. So at first I was kind of appalled. Like, I thought this was an innocent little video about a movie that I saw. But of course, people found something bad to say about it. But then you get used to it. And what I loved was it gave me some traction. It gave me an opportunity. Like, oh, okay, you didn't like this? Well, let me, answer that. And in the early days, I don't do that much anymore. In the early days, I would get on a lot and I would respond to comments. As I mentioned last time, I've got a bit of that joie de combat. I kind of like getting into the, fray. So it was actually one of the ways that we drove interest in our videos. I got on there a lot and answered them.
And your viewers may not know this, but you still do occasionally
I do.
Show up in the comments.
And what's interesting, Matt, over the years, the number of people have said to me, Many years ago, that video you did on atheism, and you got in this long argument with this guy. Well, that had a big impact on me.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking at all about that. You're thinking, oh, I'm just answering this one guy. But other people were listening into the argument.
Yeah, well, people read comments for better or worse.
I know, and I say my first essay is kind of for worse, because sometimes you'll do something and you sort of feel like, boy, I've crafted this beautiful sculpture, and now it's just covered in
Yeah,
graffiti,
right, yeah.
and everyone reads the graffiti first. But so it goes.
Let's now turn to some of the criticisms themselves. We have a litany of them. Unsurprisingly, given our polarized age, they generally fall into two categories. So you and the rest of us at Word on Fire are either A, too conservative, meaning the ministry is too traditional because we are not sufficiently open to the spirit of the times, or we're too liberal, meaning the ministry is too caught up in trying to engage with the secular world and therefore not traditional enough. So within this rough framework, let's look at criticism number one.
I'll say something first about that, because something I'm very proud of. I don't know any other figure in the public space, let's say a Catholic figure, who's criticized more from both the left and the right than I am. There are a lot of people, everyone's criticized, like the left hates this guy and the right hates that guy. Name someone else who's criticized more than I am by both the left and the right. I'm proud of that. Because when extremes on both sides are finding a problem, then I'm likely in the right place. So I'm happy with that we get critique from both extremes.
And you'll certainly see that in the criticisms.
Yeah. Right.
So here's the first one. Bishop, you have often critiqued the Catholicism that you grew up with as what you call beige Catholicism, and banners and balloons Catholicism, both of which I love. But some have responded that this characterization is unfair because it trivializes the work of those who were just trying to make the church more relevant to the culture and more inclusive, especially of young people. So how do you respond to that criticism?
Well, I'd respond this way. I mean, Word on Fire is all about making the church, if you want, relevant to the culture, reaching out to the skeptical culture, reaching out maybe especially to younger people who have questions. I got nothing against that. I'm all in favor of the Vatican II. Balthasar said we got to raise the bastions, knock down the walls, and get out into real dialogue with the world. I am a great devotee of Gaudium et Spes. I'm for all of that. The problem is it wasn't done well.
Mm-hmm.
And I can testify to that from my own direct experience. What I'm calling the beige Catholicism is a culturally accommodating Catholicism. The world sets the agenda for the church. That was a big thing in my time as a kid. And let's dumb it down to make it as easily accessible, to anybody in the culture. Those were mistaken ways of doing it. I'm not opposed to doing it. I accept the Vatican II call to engage the world, but it was done very poorly indeed. And statistically, you can show that had a terrible effect. That the banners and balloons, beige Catholicism, produced a lot of the people who disaffiliated.
Mm-hmm.
You know why? Because they grew up. And this childish, superficial Catholicism they were given, this is my generation, didn't speak to them when they faced the difficulties of life. And I stand by that criticism. But I stand by my criticism of banners and balloons. The critics here, though, are pointing to what was valid about Vatican II. I'm in favor of that. Word on Fire is all about that. But we do it in a different way.
One of the comments we most frequently hear, both within the Institute and on the productions you do, is, I had no idea the church taught that.
Yeah, I know. There was a professor many years ago at DePaul in Chicago, and he used my book, And Now I See, for his one of his undergraduate classes, right? And he said this young lady came up to him from the class and said, it's the funniest thing. I never knew that the Catholic Church had things to say about God and about redemption and about the cross and about Jesus. And I just thought it meant, they're against gay marriage and they're against abortion. And he said it was such an eye-opener because she was being sincere. Because my book is all about all those things, not about the hot-button issues. But that's a failure in catechesis. And believe me, my generation got it. I've been fighting that most of my career.
All right, so criticism number 2. One of the guiding principles of Word on Fire is to lead with beauty.
Yeah.
Some critics respond, however, that prioritizing beauty is at best a luxury and should be an afterthought in the Christian life because there's so much urgent work to do in healing a torn, impoverished, and suffering world. And that's where our focus should be, not on beauty. How do you
Don't
respond?
build Shar Cathedral. Just feed the hungry. Don't, Dante, you're wasting your time with that Divine Comedy thing. Get out there and help the poor. Flannery O'Connor, don't write those short stories. There are hungry people right now in your hometown. Why aren't you out feeding them? The problem with that, Matt, and you know this well, it's a kind of weird Kantianism of a reduction of religion to the ethical.
Right.
And today we tend to see ethics not so much in the private, but the social realm, right? So social ethics, that's what religion is all about. Religion is about social ethics. It is indeed. But there's a reductionism. The Catholic Church has embraced the beautiful alongside of its great service of the poor. Take someone like Dorothy Day. You know, there's no one who served the poor more fully than Dorothy Day did. She had profound respect for the beauty of the liturgical and sacramental tradition of the church. Think of the fact that Chartres Cathedral, I think the most beautiful covered space in the world, was designed by a cultural elite. That's true. But it was built by poor people. It was built by the average working people of the time and place. One of my heroes, Reynold Hillenbrand, who was rector of Mundelein Seminary back in the 30s and 40s. And he was a great friend of Dorothy Day, a friend of advocate for social justice. He said, the poor need beauty as much as they need food and drink. See, and he had an integrated Catholic sensibility. I don't like this neo-Kantian reductionism, but it was very prevalent in the years I was coming of age, which is why the religion we got was largely, you know, social justice. It was largely a kind of liberal political program with a slight religious decoration around the edges. The beauty of the faith, especially as expressed in the liturgy, that's at the heart of the matter. Second observation, I've made this many times, is in our postmodern culture, when people are very skeptical of truth claims and moral claims, right? Don't tell me what to think. Don't tell me how to behave. But the beautiful is much less threatening. Let me just show you something. Look at Chartres Cathedral. Look at the stories of Flannery O'Connor. Read Dante's Divine Comedy. It's not a threatening move. Therefore, it's more helpful in our day and age, I think. And that's one reason why we tried to incorporate it.
I think it's fair to say that the church, especially in the West, losing contact with its roots in the beauty has also contributed to its loss of efficacy at the evangelical level.
I think so. I grew up with a dumbed-down Catholicism. I also grew up with a de-beautified Catholicism. Yeah. Look at the churches built when I was coming of age. Balthasar called them the great barns of the Reformation. You know, these big, empty spaces, devoid of symbolism and color. It was kind of a Bauhaus modernism with a slightly religious decoration. A huge mistake. To my mind, brutalist modernism is not a form of architecture that bears the Christian mystery.
Right.
It's not a question of antiquarianism, like we can only go back to Gothic cathedrals. No, but you have to choose an architectural style that bears the weight of Christian revelation. If you choose one that is so indebted to the assumptions of modernity, it's not going to do the job.
Yeah, I've been in some, let's say, modern churches that it's as if they're like embarrassed of being religious.
Yeah,
They're trying to hide their religiosity.
Feel like a bank or something,
yeah,
right?
Right.
Or to fit into the suburban landscape. The point is the church is meant to stand out. It's another world. When you pass through those doors, you're stepping out of the ordinary world into a higher world of the angels and the saints. But they were made to be kind of comfortable domestic spaces. That's contrary to the purpose of the liturgy.
Let's go move on to criticism number 3. So,
okay, number 3.
We're just getting started. One of the hallmarks of your preaching and teaching, bishops, is to engage with some of the deepest, and we could even say most scholarly thinkers in the Western intellectual tradition, the Catholic tradition specifically, people like St. Irenaeus and St. Thomas Aquinas, St. John Henry Newman, the theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar. So here's the critique. How do you respond to those who say that drawing on these kinds of thinkers smacks of elitism and is only appropriate in a university classroom, not a church?
Tell that to Fulton Sheen. I mean, or John Paul II. Think of probably the two most effective evangelists in the 20th century, Catholic evangelists, Fulton Sheen and John Paul II, both highly cultivated men. Sheen has the agrégé, the advanced doctoral degree from Louvain. John Paul II, double doctorate, teaching at the highest levels. Read the Lublin lectures of John Paul II sometime. If you want the highest level engagement of moral theology. What those people did is they took those very high ideas and they were able to use them to produce a very substantial form of evangelization. I hate dumbed down Catholicism. I got it as a kid, and it was a pastoral disaster. As I say, because people grew up and they faced life, and this dumbed down, superficial, for kids theology wasn't going to sustain them. The great evangelizers were informed deeply by the theological tradition. And, the underestimation of what young people are capable of drives me up the wall in the Catholic Church. And it's been true now for decades that we've underplayed what kids are. For some reason, I've been on this soapbox for a long time, but high school kids can handle Shakespeare just fine. They can handle Virgil's Aeneid just fine. They can handle, I think my nephew, now at SpaceX, MIT graduate, when he was in high school, he was doing calculus at the highest levels. They can handle that, but somehow we're convinced when it comes to religion, we got to give them comic books. So that critique, I have zero patience for that because I think that's wreaked havoc. That sort of attitude has caused trouble in the church. The dumbed down, it's an elite. Tell that to Fulton Sheen. Yeah. It's a stupid critique, and it's a dangerous critique. It's done a lot of damage to the church. So you can tell I'm very fond of it.
Well, it seems to wrap itself in kind of a democratic populism.
Right.
It's speaking for the people, but it's actually very condescending,
It's
right?
condescending, right. Don't underestimate the people of God and what they're capable of, especially young people. Again, why? My nephew went to a public high school outside Chicago. It wasn't like some elite academy. He went to public high school. And I asked him one time, when you arrived at MIT, did you feel ready on day one? He goes, yeah. And kudos to his teachers at that high school. But why do we think when it comes to religion, no, it's elite. Why isn't that elitism?
Yeah.
Why is he reading, Isaac Newton and Einstein? I mean, isn't that elitist? Come on. We're giving the kids the highest thing we can give them in high school, except when it comes to religion. That is a stupid mistake.
All right, criticism number 4. So regarding the thought of Hans Urs von Balthasar in particular, one of the enduring attacks against you, Bishop, is that you have drawn on von Balthasar's theology to endorse a doctrine of universal salvation, that is, that God ultimately will save all people and that hell is therefore, quote unquote, empty. Now, I know you've done this before, but please could you set the record straight once again on your position?
No, because I just follow Balthasar here. Neither Balthasar nor I accept a doctrine of universal salvation. That's a heresy. If you say the doctrine is God will definitely save all people, there's no question about it, hell is necessarily empty, that's universalism, was condemned very early on in the church. Balthasar does not embrace it. I don't embrace it. Following him, I would say we may hope, indeed, we should hope, that all people might be saved. That's not saying they all will be saved. It's not a prediction. It's a spiritual attitude. I hope. And that hope is born of love, right? I hope in love that all people might be saved. If you look in the Catechism of 1993, you find this statement. In hope, the church prays for the salvation of all. Okay, how can you pray for the salvation of all if you think it's absolutely impossible, unless you can hope for it? And indeed, that's just what it says. In hope, the church prays for the salvation of all. That's my position. If you want to see it, Ignatius asked me, Ignatius Press, years ago to do a new preface for Balthasar's book called Dare We Hope, that all be saved. And I tried to lay this out, clearly. The trouble again in the internet world, is that people just pick up on something. They don't read carefully. They don't appreciate nuance and distinction. Hope is not expectation. Hope is not prediction. It's hope, right? And in hope, the church prays for the salvation of all. I think if you don't hold that position, you're in a strange place spiritually. So that's that.
Is it also fair to say that hope is not probability?
Yeah, no, it's none of that. It's hope. Hope has its own texture. In fact, the Aquinas says that we only hope for difficult things. Like you don't say, I hope the sun comes up tomorrow. I fully expect it to come up tomorrow. You hope for difficult things. I'll say so, as a Cub fan, I hope the Cubs might win. That's a
It's
difficult.
very difficult thing.
No, I'm being flip there, but it's that's a very important distinction. So of course it's difficult or unlikely or boy, who knows. I only hope for hard things, not for things I easily expect.
All right, criticism number 5. Another longtime complaint of the online commentariat is that you, Bishop, and Word on Fire as a whole are both A, too political, because, for example, you recently attended the State of the Union at a congressman's invitation, and yet also B, not political enough,
course, yeah.
because you and the ministry do not publicly endorse and or condemn certain policies and politicians that some critics believe deserve either support or condemnation. So how, Bishop, do you respond to these apparently contradictory complaints that we're both too political and not
Yeah.
political enough?
Well, yeah, I'll just observe, what we said earlier is the case here. It's always both left and right, both liberals and conservatives get mad for different reasons. And it's because you're not making the right distinctions. I'll say a word about the State of the Union thing, because there was the level of stupidity in the commentariat about that was staggering. Even though I'm used to stupid commentary, it was staggering. I was invited by a nice congressman from West Virginia to come to the State of the Union address. The president, duly elected president of the United States, addressing a joint session of Congress. Look, I'm an American citizen. I find that fascinating, interesting. I didn't give a speech. I didn't endorse anybody. I didn't hold forth on any political matter. I sat in a chair in the gallery and listened at the kind invitation of a congressman to the duly elected president address the Congress. What's the matter with that? How is that being too political? That's accepting a kind invitation and taking in a speech. I did a little video in the wake of it. The only time, because people said, oh, he's going as he's a Trump supporter and a Trumpian, advocate. The only mention I made of President Trump was, I'm not a cheerleader for President Trump. That's the one comment I made. I said, I'm a cheerleader for Catholic social teaching. It's true. And then I said, it was kind of a disconcerting display of the disunity in our country. And when I saw the two sides of the Congress so obviously at odds, and I call for greater civility. Okay, show me the problem with that, One of my favorites was, there was a photo of me shaking hands with the Speaker of the House, right, Mike Johnson. I was invited to the Speaker's reception, which had like hundreds of people at it. This is a huge crowd. And eventually my host, the congressman, brought me in, and I met the Speaker of the House, and I shook his hand, and I smiled, and someone took a picture. Why didn't you tell him? Yeah, at a reception. What, I'm going to punch the Speaker of the House, or I'm going to start lecturing the Speaker of the House. I also loved, he goes to Washington, and is he going to speak truth to power? Yeah, I'm going to stand up in the gallery at the State of the Union address and start shouting at the president. I mean, there's the lunacy of these suggestions. So anyway, that was, to me, just a ridiculous observation. What was the second half?
That we're not political enough because
yeah.
we don't endorse or condemn or get involved at the policy level.
I mean, you know this too very well, is that a distinction has always got to be made between certain matters that are clear instances of something that's morally wrong and problematic. So let's say abortion is a prime example. It's intrinsically evil. There's no excuse for that. There's no way you can justify it. And the church can and should speak out clearly. Same thing with euthanasia. Same thing with capital punishment. Same thing with the abuse of children. I mean, certain things are objectively, intrinsically evil. Other things are a matter of political prudence. Other things are, the principles are clear, but now how do we apply the principles in this case? It's a matter of prudential judgment. Good example would be the immigration debate. That all people should be treated with love and respect? Yes. All people are sources of infinite dignity? Of course. Now, how do you manage the border of a country? How do you particularly manage these complex issues? Well, I'm not an expert in that. I'm not proposing legislation. That's not my job. So the church can and should speak out in those former cases. The latter cases, I think the church should articulate the great principles and then say it's up to your prudential judgment. I have been very clear, and go in my record there, on abortion. I said all kinds of things very clearly against it. Capital punishment, I've spoken out very clearly against. So I think that's the distinction that often gets blurred there when you say you're not political enough. We should back away from matters that are legitimately left to the prudential judgment of those who are skilled in those areas, let's say.
How do you respond to those who see this conflict and say, Bishop, I wish you and Word on Fire would just not say anything at all that could have any kinds of political...
Because you can, because Christianity is not a private matter. It's a public reality. And we can and should speak in the public forum about these ethical matters of clear importance. So, no, that's an attempt to privatize.
Mm-hmm.
And see, again, people blur all of that when they start throwing around, church and state and the wall of separation. And there's all kinds of confusion around that. I think this is the clear distinction that has to be made between certain things that are intrinsically evil that show up in the public forum and they have to be called out, and then things that are matters of prudential judgment. And sure, let's say you're a left-wing publication and you've got certain opinions about what the law should look like, off you go. You're a right-wing publication. You're a left-wing politician, a right-wing politician. Fine, that's your business. But as a bishop of the church, mine is not to intervene when it comes to those particular matters of prudential judgment.
Let's go to criticism number 6, and this is related to the politics issue. Detractors have also complained that your critiques of wokeism are both A, unfair to, in their view, the worthy social justice elements of the woke movement, and B, also asymmetrical in the sense that your critiques only seem to be of the left side of the ideological spectrum and not the right side. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, those are both wrong-headed. See, wokeism, yes, you can make a really simple move and say, well, woke just means I'm alert to social injustice. Okay, if that's all it means, grand. We should all be woke. Fine, if that's all it means. But it doesn't just mean that, and everyone knows it. Wokeism, and look, I've read the theoreticians of wokeism. Right. I'm not just blowing smoke here. I've read all these people that propagate the woke perspective. Wokeism is a popularization of critical theory. Critical theory emerged first in the European academies, largely in Germany and France, then came over to our country like in the 1970s, gestated there like a bacillus, I would say, and then poured out onto the streets in about 2020, in that awful summer of 2020. Wokeism, critical theory is a farrago, Marxism, Freudianism, European postmodernism. And I've done all this, so I'm not going to go into detail, but that is repugnant to Catholic social teaching. Not being alert to social injustice, that's all great. I'm all in favor of that. But the particular form that wokeism takes is repugnant to Catholic social teaching. And I made that case over and over again. So that's wokeism. The second thing that I'm just going after the left is false. And see, here's part of the problem, Matt, is that I've been doing this for so long, 25 years, in all kinds of different forums, articles and books and podcasts and videos and so on, that what people often do is they'll find something I said. He doesn't like wokeism, therefore he's a right-wing fanatic and hates all the left. No. Have the patience to kind of go through a lot of the work I've done. Now, I know that maybe everyone can't read and listen to everything I've ever said, but I'll give you some examples where the right gets very annoyed with me. I stood up in Dublin, 2018, World Meeting of Families, and I gave a talk at the invitation of the Vatican, and I strongly defended Amoris Laetitia. This controversial text of Pope Francis. I did an hour-long, full-throated defense of Amoris Laetitia. Happy to do it. Go online, you can find it. When Laudato Si came out, remember the Pope's, it was so-called, the global warming encyclical. And I argued, no, don't see it that way. This is the Pope influenced by Romano Guardini and his work in the 1930s, his suspicion of the technocratic sensibility of modernity, and the Pope hearkening back to a pre-modern Francis of Assisi, Thomas Aquinas indeed, and the Bible, and a very rich scriptural sense of, if you want to call it environmentalism, or a sense of the importance of nature. I defended the Pope when Fratelli Tutti came out, remember? And he was critiqued, he's a Marxist. And I said, no, not a Marxist, he's a Thomist, because he's talking about the universal destination of goods, which is an idea, and I found exactly where it was in Thomas Aquinas. Just a handful of examples there where the right got mad at me when I was advocating what are, if you want, left-wing opinions. All right, as I've said many times, my lodestar is Catholic social teaching. Sometimes the left agrees with it, sometimes the right agrees with it. Sometimes the left is opposed to it. Sometimes the right's opposed to it. I don't care about left and right. I don't care about liberal Republican. That's exactly what I said in that video after the State of the Union thing, was that I'm not here to advocate for Trump or to advocate for the Democrats. I'm advocating Catholic social teaching. And I would challenge anyone to find an exception to that in my writings and videos. That's what I've done. But see, that makes you very susceptible to this kind of criticism because Catholic social teaching is both liberal and conservative, neither liberal nor conservative.
And those who are willing to lie by omission can create a false narrative.
It's as a bishop, I get letters in my office, and I have my assistant. He's funny. We put him in two piles. Whenever anything, when it comes to the political life, I said, well, okay, the Catholic social teaching piles, there's the liberal and the conservatives. Get mad at me. It's just an occupational hazard of anyone who articulates the church's social teaching because it doesn't fit into our categories. But people want it to. They want it to. I'll give another example. Years ago, I was invited by the Heritage Foundation, which is one of the best-known, conservative think tanks in Washington. I was invited to give the, it wasn't Courtney Murray lecture, it was the Russell Kirk lecture. I was honored to do it. They asked me to talk about church and the American Project. So I said a lot of things. Where I said, yeah, the American Project coheres very much with the church in A, B, C, D, and E. But in other ways, I argued it doesn't. And I said it's Hobbesian, Lockean elements are often at odds with a Catholic view, and I kind of laid all that out. Gave the paper, everybody applauded, and it was very nice. In the reception afterwards, a number of people came up to me and were not happy at all with, what do you mean the Catholic Church is opposed to the American? I said, well, I think it is in some ways, My point there is I got some conservatives mad at me. I went into the heart of a conservative think tank, laid out Catholic social teaching, which they liked to some degree, didn't like to some degree.
And those are fundamental principle disagreements with that element of conservatism.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it goes, And that's why I see people, they'll always find some part of my overall work and they'll fixate upon it and say, oh, he's a liberal. Oh, he's a conservative. I'm a Catholic.
So here's another critique that seems to hit from both sides of the divide at the same time. It's on the topic of Vatican II. So you and Word on Fire simultaneously attack for both A, being too supportive of Vatican II, because you uphold its theological and liturgical and moral agenda, and yet B, not supportive enough of Vatican II because you reject the so-called spirit of Vatican II's influence on the church. So how do you respond to this dual critique?
Yeah, good. Same thing, though. It's the same kind of animal, isn't it? Of both sides kind of missing the point. I've been very clear. You don't have to guess on this one at all. I've been very clear where I stand. I stand with Vatican II as interpreted by the great post-conciliar popes from Paul VI to Francis, with a special stress on John Paul II, who had the lengthiest, magisterium on that. And I stand with the Catechism of 1993. Those are my kind of lodestars, and that's my bedrock. I'm a man of Vatican II. We published at Word on Fire this wonderful series of the reissue of the texts of Vatican II with commentary and so on. My hero, Cardinal George, was a man of Vatican II. From that vantage point, I look at two problems. One is a Catholic progressivism. Now, that produced the beige Catholicism of my youth. It produced the banners and balloons. It produced the dumbed-down Catholicism. It produced the culturally accommodating Catholicism. It produced the weird liturgical experimentation of the 1970s. I don't like that, and I've been very clear about it. I don't like Catholic progressivism. On the other hand, we got the sort of rad-trad side of the conservative Catholic movement that's down on Vatican II. And again, I've read the leaders of these positions. Not everyone, but there's leadership that are critical of Pope Francis, dismissive of him, and question the legitimacy of the Second Vatican Council. I've said, if you want to find it, it's a talk I gave to the Napa conference during COVID. It's on tape. Where I said, this makes you effectively a Protestant. If you're saying, I can pick and choose which ecumenical councils I like, which parts of which ecumenical councils I like, you become a Protestant. I don't like that. I don't like Catholic rad-tradism. I don't like Catholic progressivism. I like the Second Vatican Council, interpreted by the great post-conciliar popes, articulated doctrinally in the Catechism of 1993. That's what I'm for. Now, to no one's surprise, when you take that position, the progressives won't like you and the rad-trads won't like you. So it goes. But I nailed my colors of the mast a long time ago on that, and I'm standing with Cardinal George. That's exactly where he was.
Mm-hmm.
I'm standing with John Paul II. I remember certainly when he was Pope, the liberal critique of John Paul II. But I remember this now after he died, and I'm reading some people on the conservative side, and I realize, oh wait a minute, they don't like John Paul II. They're really going after John Paul II. Like, wow, something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
The right, that part of the right has gotten off beam. So I get it. That's where that comes from, is the fact that I've taken this position. I'm unapologetic about it. I've been very clear about it. That's where I stand. And so the two extremes, of course, aren't going to like it.
And it doesn't seem that it's Bishop Barron's position. It seems just orthodoxy.
Well, yeah, and it's orthodoxy, construed in the full sense, meaning that includes all the great councils of the church. Yeah. I would say it's John Paul II's position. It's Cardinal George's position. That's where I stand. And, it's not, you don't have to guess at what I feel. I'm telling everybody that's where I stand. Now, you can split off from that, liberal or conservative. But I say a pox on both your houses. Mm-hmm. I want to stand with this great conciliar tradition.
Well, final criticism. In addition to your own Bishop Barron Presents show, which invites well-known guests for extended conversations, you regularly appear on other high-profile people's shows and podcasts, many of them non-Catholic, to offer your commentary. So, Bishop, how do you respond to the general complaint, which again comes from both sides, that basically takes this form? I can't believe that Bishop Barron talked with that person or on that platform.
Yeah. Look, that's an age-old problem. And if you start playing that game, you'll never get anywhere, and your show will stop. Because if the game is, okay, I will only talk to people that will cause no offense whatsoever to anybody. I will go on a show if and only if no one will be offended by that person. Well, I talked to Jesus and the Blessed Mother, maybe, There's no way that you can do that if you're trying to be completely inoffensive to absolutely everybody. My policy has been for many, many years, if I'm given a platform, they're not going to censor me. I'll take it. I'm an evangelist. My job is to get the message of the church out to a wide audience. And so you give me a platform. Now, of course, I'm not going to go on some Nazi platform or some communist platform. Of course, there are limits, But generally speaking, reasonably construed, someone gives me a platform, they don't censor me, I'll go on it. Now, I'll give you some examples, because people will come after me saying, oh, you only talk to conservatives. How about the critique I've gotten from the right? Because for many years, I spoke at the LA Religious Education Congress. I don't know if our audience knows much about that, but it's been one of the most prominent, places in the Catholic Church every year, like February, March, in Anaheim Convention Center, this big convention. And it would certainly lean left. It always has. I was invited beginning in the late 90s, and I've never been censored. I would give the talk on whatever topic I chose. What they do at the Congress is they send you afterwards evaluation, because the people will evaluate you, right? And they send it back to you and tell you what it was. And then they say, well, based on this, we want you to come back. Okay. I always got evaluated well. I was always invited back. How could you go to the Los Angeles Religious Education? Don't you know the weirdos that are speaking there, and they're so crazy? Yeah, I know there are a number of people that I wouldn't have invited if I were in charge of it, people that I don't agree with. A lot of people I do agree with at the LA Congress. But the point is, they gave me a platform. They didn't censor me. They kept inviting me back. Once I gave the keynote there, and in the big arena, I gave this rip-snorting 45-minute talk against beige Catholicism and banners and balloons Catholicism. No kidding. And they cheered me, gave me positive evaluations, and invited me back. Okay, I do that. Now I'll go on a show, let's say Ben Shapiro, Oh, how could you possibly talk to Ben Shapiro? This, crazy, radical conservative. Look, he gives me a platform. He's a very friendly fellow. He's never censored me in any way. Asked interesting, important questions. I'm invited by Tom Suozzi, liberal Democrat representative, to speak at the Library of Congress. How could you, Tom Suozzi and the Library of Congress and all these crazy Democrats, how could you do that? I go to the Parliament in London. Don't you know? I've heard all these critiques. Don't you know who's there at the? See, my point is, both left and right get mad for different reasons. But if I start playing that game, I would never speak to anyone in the public forum. So I don't play that game.
It also seems to me that the sort of the fear of causing offense is not only contrary to the sort of the content and spirit of Christianity, but also contrary to the Bible itself and what
Yeah.
we see, for example, in the letters of St. Paul.
Yeah, no, quite right, quite right. Anyway, I actually wrote some of these down because I wanted to, when people say, oh, on your show, I mean, you're only talking to conservatives. Nonsense. Here's some names. Jason Blakely we had on many years ago in California. Jason's a great guy, and we had a wonderful conversation. He writes frequently for Commonweal, probably the second most liberal Catholic publication out there. I had Tara Isabella Burton on, wonderful cultural commentator on religion, certainly not someone of the right. I had Jennifer Rosenhagen on. She wrote a great book. I ran across it in a youth bookstore on Nietzsche's influence in American culture. I thought it was really interesting. She would not be a conservative by any means. I had a wonderful hour-long conversation with her. How about Ethan and Maya Hawke? That guy, Barron, only talks to conservatives. What are they? These actors, you know. How about Ro Khanna? I sat in this very room with Ro Khanna, liberal Democratic congressman from California. We had a splendid conversation. He's a great guy. We disagreed. Watch it if you want. We disagreed on a number of important things, but I talked to him. Shia LaBeouf, maybe the most famous of the Bishop Barron Presents. I don't know what Shia is, liberal conservative. I talk to people that I think are interesting, that will contribute to the cultural conversation, and that are evangelically promising. So it's not the case. That's my overall point here. Not the case that I'm only speaking to conservatives. Again, people will fixate on one. Like, oh, I saw him talking to Ben Shapiro. Therefore, watch all the work that I do would be more helpful.
Before we turn to our listener question, and as a way to wrap up, Bishop, what advice do you have to evangelists, based on all the years of experience, on how to respond to public criticism, especially when it's vicious?
Well, yeah, if it's really vicious stuff, I would tend to ignore it because that's just sort of silly. And I think as we've been talking, this has been growing as a conviction in my mind, is you can't worry about all this. If you do, the project's over. The plane's going to go down. I mean, if you're constantly worried about like how I'm going to please these wildly diverse audiences, you won't. So you got to have thick skin, and you've got to just go out there with a certain evangelical panache, and not worry about it. You know, because if you start looking at the critics all the time and worrying on what so and so is going to say, you won't accomplish anything. So it's part of public life. If you're going to be declaring the faith in a public forum, expect it, but don't get preoccupied with it.
It is now time for our listener question. Today we have Tony from Ohio asking about how we should understand the meaning and implications of turning the other cheek.
Hey, Bishop Barron, this is Tony from Ohio. I just have a question about turning the other cheek. Is there a way to understand turning the other cheek without it enabling the person striking the other cheek to continue to do so? Thank you. Thank you for all that you do.
That's a great question. I wrote about it. What book? Maybe it's The Strangest Way I talk about that. Because you're right. It's not passivity. Turning that cheek, it does not mean I just give in to evil. In fact, it's a way of confronting evil. Gandhi learned it, and he learned it from Matthew's Gospel. When the young Gandhi read the Gospel of Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount, he understood this principle. Martin Luther King did, of course, too, in our country, from the same text. The idea is not giving in. It's standing your ground and mirroring back to the aggressive person his aggression so that he might see in you what he's been doing. It's a kind of shaming move. It's meant to shame the aggressor into seeing what's happening. Therefore, it's like that Aikido, the martial art that uses the aggression of your opponent against him. You're not so much fighting directly, you're using his aggression against him. That's turn the other cheek. It's not caving in. It's standing your ground in a provocative way so as to shame the person into deeper self-awareness. Take a look. I think it's in my book, The Strangest Way. You can find a fuller discussion of all that.
Well, thanks so much, Tony, for reaching out to us. If you would like to ask Bishop Barron a question for a future Word on Fire show, please visit askbishopbarron.com. That's askbishopbarron.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Well, Bishop, this is a fantastic conversation that I'm sure is going to have a lot of resonance out in the culture, so
Good.
thank you.
Always good being with you. Thanks.
That does it for us today. Thanks for joining us on the Word on Fire show. If you're interested in learning more about how Word on Fire can help you grow closer to Christ, become a better evangelist with and for others, and work for the common good, consider joining the Word on Fire Institute. Check us out at institute.wordonfire.org. That's institute.wordonfire.org. We'll see you next time.